Dr. Nightechoes.
I was a night watchman at a remote radio transmitter site in the mountains. It was just me in a small concrete building full of humming equipment. One night, the perimeter alarm for the north fence went off. I looked at the monitors, but it was pitch black, and the infrared was acting fuzzy. I grabbed my shotgun and a spotlight and headed out. I found the spot where the alarm had tripped. The chain-link fence, which was 10 feet tall and topped with razor wire, was peeled back like a tin can. Something hadn't climbed over it. It had pushed through it. I shined my spotlight into the trees beyond the fence. I saw two eyes reflecting back at me. They were about 8 feet off the ground and wide apart. Whatever it was huge. "Identify yourself!" The thing in the woods mimicked my voice perfectly. It didn't just repeat the words. It had my exact accent and my exact pitch. It said, "Identify yourself!" Then it started laughing. It was my laugh. I backed away toward the building, and I could hear it moving through the brush, staying just out of the light. Every time I stumbled, it made a tripping sound. When I got inside and locked the steel door, I heard something heavy lean against the building. Then a soft whisper came through the ventilation duct. "Identify yourself." I stayed in the center of the room with my gun pointed at the door until the sun came up. When the relief guard arrived, we found huge three-toed tracks in the mud around the building. They looked bird-like, but they were the size of dinner plates. I worked security for an old boarding school that stayed open over the summers for international students. One night, I got a call from a girl in the dorms saying there was a strange man in the hallway. I went over there, thinking it was just a prank or a boyfriend sneaking in. I checked the hallway and the common rooms. Nothing. I told the girl it was clear. She looked terrified and said, "He was standing right outside my door. He was so tall, his head touched the ceiling." I went back to the security office and pulled the hallway feed. I saw the girl open her door, look out, and then slam it shut. But there was nothing on the camera. I zoomed in on the carpet in front of her door. As she slammed the door, the carpet fibers directly in front of her room flattened down, as if two heavy feet were standing there. Then you could see the invisible footprints walking down the hall toward the camera. As they got closer, the camera started to flicker and get static. Just as the footprints reached the spot directly under the camera, the feed cut to black. When the feed came back up 10 seconds later, the hall was empty. I didn't tell the girl what I saw. I didn't want to be the one to tell her she was being followed by something we couldn't even see. I worked security at a very old, very large cemetery. My job was basically to drive the little truck around and make sure no one was staying after hours or knocking over headstones. One night, around 1 a.m., I saw a woman sitting on a bench near a grave in one of the oldest sections. This section had graves dating back to the 1800s. I pulled up, left the engine running, and got out. I said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but the cemetery is closed. I'm going to have to ask you to head toward the gates." She didn't move. She was wearing a very long, dark coat and a veil. She was just staring at a headstone. I walked closer, and the temperature dropped. I could see my breath, but it was a warm summer night. I got within 5 feet of her and said, "Ma'am?" She turned her head. She didn't have a face. It was just smooth skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank surface of pale flesh. She stood up and she was tall, maybe 6 feet 5 inches. She started walking toward me and she wasn't making a sound. No footsteps on the gravel, nothing. I didn't even try to be professional. I bolted for the truck, jumped in and locked the doors. I looked out the window and she was standing right next to the driver's side door, leaning down and pressing that blank face against the glass. I floored it. I didn't stop until I got to the main office. I quit the next day. I don't care if people think I'm crazy. I know what was on the other side of that glass. I worked at an old historical hotel as a night porter and security. The hotel was famous for being haunted, but I never believed in that stuff. One night, I got a call from room 412. A woman was complaining about a clanking sound coming from the pipes. I went up there, knocked on the door, and she let me in. She was an older lady and looked very tired. She said, "It's coming from the bathroom." I went into the bathroom and listened. Nothing. I turned on the shower and flushed the toilet. Silence. I told her I didn't hear anything, but to call if it started again. As I was walking out of the room, I heard it. Clang, clang, clang. It sounded like someone hitting a pipe with a hammer. I went back into the bathroom. The sound was deafening now. It was coming from behind the wall. I looked at the woman, and she was pointing at the mirror. The mirror was fogging up, even though the hot water wasn't running. Words started to appear in the fog, written from the inside of the glass. "Help me." The clanking stopped instantly. I pulled the lady out of the room and moved her to a different floor. The next day, maintenance opened the wall behind the tub to check the pipes. They found the skeleton of a woman who had gone missing in the 1920s. She had been tucked into the crawl space behind the plumbing. She had died trying to signal for help by hitting the pipes. I was a night watchman at an old pier. It was mostly used for fishing boats and some small cargo. One night, it was incredibly foggy. You couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. I was walking along the edge of the pier when I heard the sound of someone splashing in the water. It sounded heavy, like a person struggling. I ran to the edge and shined my light down. The water was choppy, but I saw a hand reach up and grab one of the wooden pilings. I dropped to my knees and reached down. "Grab my hand!" A face broke the surface. It was a man, but his skin was bloated and bruised purple. His eyes were wide open and fixed. He grabbed my forearm, and his grip was like a vice, unbelievably cold. He started pulling me down toward the water. I was screaming and trying to pull away, but he was too strong. Just as my face was about to hit the water, he let go and sank straight down without a bubble. I scrambled back and called the Coast Guard. They searched the water for hours and found nothing. When I got back to the guard shack, I looked at my forearm. There were 5 clear black and blue finger marks bruised into my skin. A week later, they pulled a body out of the water 3 miles down the coast. It was a fisherman who had gone missing 2 days after my encounter. He looked exactly like the man who had grabbed me. I worked as a night guard for a gated community that was still under construction. There were only about 5 houses finished and occupied. The rest were just empty shells or foundations. One night, I was driving the patrol car around 2 a.m. when I saw a light on in the attic window of one of the completely empty houses. Not even the drywall was up yet. I figured it was copper thieves or teenagers. I parked the car, grabbed my heavy mag light, and headed inside. The house was just a skeleton of wood and nails. I climbed the stairs to the attic. When I got up there, the light I saw from outside was gone. It was pitch black. I shined my light around and saw a man sitting on a wooden crate in the center of the room. He was wearing an old-fashioned nightshirt that went down to his knees. He was holding a lantern that wasn't lit. I did the standard security, identify yourself line. He didn't look at me. He just said, "I can't find the matches. Have you seen the matches?" I thought he was a confused local or a squatter. I told him he needed to come with me. He finally looked up, and his face was badly charred, like he had been in a fire. He stood up, and as he did, I smelled strong smoke and burnt hair. He reached a hand toward me and said, "The house is gone." "Where is the house?" I blinked, and he was gone. The crate he had been sitting on was empty. There were no footprints in the thick construction dust. I ran out so fast I left my flashlight behind. I did some digging the next day. It turned out the luxury community was built on the site of an old farmhouse that burned down in the 1920s. A man had died in the attic, trying to find his way out in the dark. I was a night watchman for a large, empty office building that had just been finished but didn't have any tenants yet. 12 floors of empty cubicles and glass. I was on the 8th floor doing a sweep. The building had motion-activated lights. I was walking down the main hallway and the lights were clicking on ahead of me and clicking off behind me. I got to the end of the hall and turned around to head back to the elevator. I noticed the lights at the far end of the hallway, where I had just come from, started clicking back on. Click, click, click. One section at a time, moving toward me. Something was walking toward me and triggering the sensors, but the hallway was completely empty. I watched as the lights directly in front of me clicked on, one by one, until the section I was standing in lit up. I felt a rush of ice-cold air pass right through me. Then the lights behind me started clicking on, heading toward the elevator. I heard the ding of the elevator doors opening. I ran to the doors, but they were already closing. I watched the floor indicator. It went down to the lobby, then the basement, and then it stayed there. I took the stairs down. When I got to the lobby, the other guard asked me why I had sent the elevator down empty. I told him I didn't. We checked the security footage. The doors opened on the 8th floor, and the elevator was empty. As the doors closed, you could see a faint, blurry indentation on the carpet, like someone was standing there. I worked security for an old, mostly abandoned shipyard. There was one specific crane, a massive, rusting thing from the 1940s, that was locked and hadn't been powered up in decades. Around 3 a.m., I was doing my rounds in the golf cart when I heard the sound of heavy gears grinding. I looked up and saw the arm of the old crane slowly rotating. It was moving against the wind and perfectly smooth. I thought maybe scrappers had brought a generator and jumped the controls. I climbed the ladder to the operator's cab to catch them. The cab was welded shut. The door was fused to the frame with rust and old welds. I shined my light through the cracked glass. Sitting in the seat was a skeletal figure wearing a rotted yellow rain slicker. Its hands, just white bone, were gripping the control levers. The crane arm suddenly swung the other way with a violent jerk. The figure turned its head toward the window. It didn't have eyes, just dark hollows, but I felt it looking straight at me. I fell off the ladder, dropping about 10 feet onto the gravel. When I looked back up, the crane had stopped moving and the cab was empty. The slicker was gone. I checked the ground for footprints, but there were only my own. I worked security for an old library. It was built in the early 1900s and had massive oak doors and creaky floors. One night, I was sitting at the desk when I heard a book hit the floor. Then another. Thump, thump, thump. I went into the stacks, and in the history section, about a dozen books were lying on the floor. I picked them up and put them back. I returned to the desk, and 10 minutes later, I heard it again. I went back, and the same books were on the floor. I decided to sit in the dark at the end of the aisle to see who was doing it. After about 30 minutes, I saw a book slowly slide out of the shelf. It wasn't falling. It was being pulled. It hovered for a second and then dropped. Then another one slid out. I shined my light down the aisle. An elderly woman in a gray dress was standing at the other end. She looked like a classic librarian. She was staring at the shelf and looked furious. She turned to me and whispered, "They're in the wrong order." She flickered like a dying light bulb and disappeared. I looked at the books on the floor and realized the day shift had mislabeled a whole section of biographies. I spent the rest of my shift fixing them. No books ever fell again on my shift. I was a night watchman at a luxury car dealership. The lot was surrounded by a high fence with barbed wire. It was usually a very safe job. One night around 3 a.m., I was doing my perimeter walk when I saw a man standing just outside the fence. He was wearing a tattered trench coat and staring at one of the cars. I told him he needed to move along. He didn't blink. He pointed at a silver Mercedes and said, "That's mine." I told him, "Look, buddy, I don't want any trouble. Just keep moving." He looked at me for the first time. His eyes were milky white. He was totally blind. He said, "I died in that car. Check the VIN." Then he walked into the darkness. I thought he was just a crazy transient, but it bothered me. The next morning, I checked the history of that car. It was a trade-in that had just arrived. It had been in a fatal accident 3 years earlier. The previous owner was a blind man being driven by his son. The blind man died in the passenger seat. I worked the night shift at a massive distribution warehouse. My job was to walk the catwalks near the ceiling and make sure the automated sorting systems weren't jamming. It was 4 a.m., and the floor below was empty because that section was closed for maintenance. I was walking the metal grates when I saw a man standing on the floor below under a dim security light. He was looking up at me. He was wearing an old security uniform that our company stopped using in the 90s. I shouted, "Hey, this area is restricted." He didn't say anything. He raised his hand and pointed toward the conveyor belt behind me. I turned to look, but there was nothing there. When I turned back, he was gone. A few seconds later, the catwalk I was standing on gave way. A support bolt had snapped. I barely caught myself on the railing. If I hadn't turned around, I would have walked right over the collapsed section. The next day, I told the older workers about it. One of them showed me a Polaroid from 1994. It was a man named Dave. He died when a pallet fell on him in that same aisle. He was the man I saw. He was still doing his rounds and watching out for other guards.